The first thing I remember is the smell of motor oil and wet asphalt. I was lying on my back somewhere cold and dark, staring at what I thought was a ceiling, but turned out to be the underside of my own truck. My cheek was pressed against the gravel. My left shoulder felt like someone had driven a railroad spike through it, and every breath I took came with a grinding sensation behind my ribs that I knew, even in that foggy state, was not a good sign. I tried to move my right hand and found it pinned under my hip. I tried to call out and found that my throat produced nothing louder than a wet rasp. I had no idea how long I had been there. The sky above the truck was the dark purple of very early morning, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock. I could hear crickets. I could hear the distant rush of water, which told me I was somewhere near the creek that ran along the back end of the property my wife and her business partner had been developing for the past 2 years. The project they had poured everything into, the project that, I had recently discovered, was not the only thing they had been pouring themselves into. I heard footsteps on gravel, then a flashlight swept across my face. Oh God. Oh God, he's here. I found him. A woman's voice, tight with panic. Sir, can you hear me? Sir, don't move. I'm calling 911 right now. I closed my eyes. I let her call. And while I lay there waiting for the ambulance, I thought very carefully about what I was going to say when the paramedics arrived. Because, even in that condition, even with gravel embedded in my face and what I was fairly certain was a fractured rib pressing against something it shouldn't be pressing against, I understood one thing clearly. My wife and her business partner thought I was dead. And I had decided that, for now, I was going to let them keep thinking that. Let me go back about 6 weeks. My wife and I had been married for 11 years. She was 40, I was 43. We had met at a conference in Austin, both of us in real estate adjacent fields. She was developing commercial properties. I managed the technology infrastructure side of large construction projects. We clicked immediately. She was sharp, funny, relentlessly ambitious in a way I found genuinely attractive. We built something good together. Not flashy, but solid. A house in a decent suburb, a golden retriever named Cooper, a standing Saturday morning routine that involved bad coffee, and the newspaper even though neither of us would admit we still subscribed to a print edition. I want to say that clearly before anything else. What we had was real. That matters to me. It matters because what she did wasn't some impulsive mistake. It was a sustained, deliberate choice made by someone who knew exactly what she was choosing to destroy. The first sign appeared 14 months before any of this happened. I was using my wife's laptop to print a boarding pass. Mine was updating, and I saw an email notification pop up in the corner of the screen. The name was her business partner, the man she co-owned the development firm with. The subject line said simply, "Last night, I didn't read it." She came into the room a moment later and closed the laptop without a word. And I told myself it was nothing. Told myself it was a professional thing. Told myself about a dozen other comfortable lies that I was very willing to believe. Because believing them was easier than the alternative. But the thought planted itself. And once it was planted, I started noticing things. Phone calls that ended when I walked into a room. A new pattern of late evenings at the project site that somehow always coincided with her business partner's schedule. A distance in my wife that I had been attributing to work stress for months, but that now, looking at it differently, looked less like exhaustion and more like guilt. I am not a confrontational person by nature. I'm an introvert who went into a field that rewards patience and systematic thinking. I don't react. I assess. So instead of confronting my wife with nothing but a feeling, I did what I was trained to do. I started collecting data. I installed a monitoring application on our shared cloud account, which I had every legal right to access. I didn't touch her phone. I didn't need to. When you share a cloud backup with someone for 11 years, you have access to quite a lot of their digital life, and my wife had never changed the settings on her end because she trusted me completely. She was right to trust me. I was the only one in our marriage who had earned that trust. Over the following 3 weeks, I read through the synchronized messages. Her business partner had been texting her from a secondary number, a burner, I assumed, that wasn't saved under his name in her contacts. He had saved himself as an interior design vendor. Clever. Not clever enough. The messages went back 8 months. They were graphic, and they were frequent, and they left absolutely no room for interpretation. I saved everything. I documented dates and times. I made copies and stored them in 3 separate encrypted locations that my wife had no access to and no knowledge of. I want to be honest about what those 3 weeks did to me. I functioned. I went to work. I came home and had dinner and watched television and slept next to my wife in our bed. I did all of that. But something in me was going through a process that I can only describe as a controlled demolition. The kind where the building comes down in a precise sequence, floor by floor, so that it doesn't damage anything around it. I was taking apart 11 years of my life in a way that wouldn't blow shrapnel in every direction. I was being careful. I was being methodical. I was doing this correctly. Because if I was going to do it, I wanted to do it in a way that left me standing when it was over. I contacted an attorney. I began quietly separating my personal finances from our joint accounts, not taking more than my fair share, just making sure my share was clearly documented and untouchable. I learned that because my wife's business had been partially capitalized by marital assets, her business partner's involvement with her constituted a significant conflict of interest that could be leveraged in divorce proceedings. I was building a case. I was doing it right. Then her business partner decided to build a case of his own. The night it happened, I had driven out to the development site at my wife's request. She had texted me saying there was a problem with the network infrastructure I'd helped install on the property 8 months earlier, a system I'd been paid for as a contractor, which now seemed relevant, and that the site manager needed someone there urgently. I didn't question it. I had no reason to. I didn't know yet that she knew I'd been watching. I found out later that she did know. Her business partner had a contact in the IT field who ran a security sweep on their communications and detected my monitoring software. They had known for approximately 9 days. They had spent those 9 days deciding what to do about it. I drove out to the site around 9 in the evening. There was no site manager waiting for me. The parking area was dark except for one set of headlights from a vehicle I didn't recognize, parked at the far end, engine running. I pulled up and stepped out of my truck, still not alarmed, still thinking this was a professional situation. I pulled out my phone to call my wife and ask where exactly she needed me. The vehicle at the far end of the lot accelerated. I heard it before I saw it fully, the engine revving in a way that didn't match a parking lot. And I had about 1 second to register that it was coming directly at me before it caught the left front corner of my truck at high speed, spinning my vehicle into me and throwing me approximately 12 feet into the adjacent gravel berm. I hit it left shoulder first, then rolled, and I don't remember anything after that until the woman with the flashlight found me. She was a property assessor who had been working late documenting the adjacent parcel for a municipal survey. She had heard the impact from the road, driven toward it, and found my truck on its side with me pinned partially underneath where the vehicle had rolled back slightly after impact. She stayed with me until the ambulance arrived. Her name was Carol. I owe her a great deal. In the emergency room, the attending physician told me I had a fractured left clavicle, 2 cracked ribs, a significant concussion, and extensive road rash along my left side. He said I was fortunate. He said the truck had partially shielded me from the full impact, and that a direct hit at that speed, in an open space, would almost certainly have been fatal. I told him I had tripped and fallen in the dark while walking the property. I told the responding officers the same thing. I was disoriented, I said. I wasn't sure what I had seen. I needed time to remember. They were skeptical. Carol had described a vehicle accelerating deliberately. There was paint transfer on my truck, consistent with a deliberate strike, but I was the victim, and I wasn't pressing anything. So they documented it and left me to rest. What I was actually doing, lying in that hospital bed with my shoulder mobilized and my ribs wrapped, and a headache that felt like something important had come loose inside my skull, was thinking. My wife and her business partner had tried to kill me. Not hurt me, not warn me. Kill me. They had lured me to an isolated location at night and used a vehicle as a weapon. They had done this because they knew I had evidence of their affair, and they were 3 weeks away from closing a multi-million-dollar commercial deal that required both of their clean signatures on a partnership agreement. A messy divorce with fraud implications would have destroyed that deal. They had decided I was worth less than a commercial real estate closing. I lay there thinking about that for a long time. My brother arrived at the hospital around 2 in the morning. He is 4 years younger than me, works in insurance, and has the precise, quiet temperament of someone who has spent 2 decades calculating risk. When I told him what had actually happened, he didn't say anything for almost a full minute. Then he said very calmly, "What do you need?" "I need my wife to think I have amnesia," I said. "At least for a few days." He looked at me for a moment. "Done," he said. My wife came to the hospital the following afternoon, the picture of a concerned spouse. She had flowers. She cried when she saw me. She held my hand and asked me over and over if I was okay, if I remembered what had happened, if the doctors had said anything about my memory. Her business partner had sent a get-well text that was so carefully worded it was almost admirable. I told her I didn't remember much. I said the doctors were monitoring for swelling. I said I was confused and tired. I watched her face while she took in this information, and I saw something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Not grief, not guilt, but calculation. A brief, nearly invisible recalibration, like a machine processing an input and adjusting its output accordingly. She squeezed my hand and said she loved me and that I should rest. When she left, I asked my brother to make sure she didn't come back unaccompanied. Over the next 4 days in the hospital, I did 3 things. First, I had my attorney send a certified letter to my wife formally notifying her of my intention to file for divorce, which would be served immediately upon my discharge. Second, I made contact with a business partner's wife, a woman I had met twice at industry events who had no idea any of this was happening. Third, I gave the responding officers an amended statement. I told them I remembered more. I told them I had seen the vehicle clearly, had seen it accelerate toward me deliberately, and that I believed the impact was intentional. I did not speculate on the driver. I let the forensics team do their work. They found the vehicle 2 days later. It had been wiped and left in a long-term parking facility at the regional airport. The paint transfer matched. The vehicle had been rented under a business account linked to my wife's development firm. The business partner's wife came to see me on day 3. She sat across from me in the hospital room with her hands folded in her lap, perfectly still, and said, "How bad is it?" "It's bad," I said. "But it's documented." She was 51 years old, composed in the way that people who have survived a great deal become composed. She had 2 adult children and a career of her own in financial consulting. She had, she told me, suspected her husband of infidelity for approximately a year. She had a prenuptial agreement that entitled her to 70% of all jointly held assets in the event of demonstrated infidelity. I told her I had 8 months of documented communications between her husband and my wife. I told her I had the rental agreement connecting her husband's business account to the vehicle used in the collision. I told her I had, in my possession, a series of financial documents relating to the commercial development project that showed irregularities suggesting my wife and her husband had been structuring the deal in a way that would have significantly disadvantaged both their spouses in any future division of assets. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll call my attorney this afternoon." "Before you do," I said, "have him freeze every joint account and business asset you can touch. Today, before the closing." She looked at me. "You think they'll try to rush it through?" "They're going to find out very soon that I remember everything," I said. "Yes, I think they'll try to rush it through." She stood up, thanked me, and walked out. The accounts were frozen by end of business that day. When my wife realized her business accounts had been locked, she came to the hospital without flowers. She closed the door behind her and stood at the foot of my bed and said, very quietly, "You remember everything, don't you?" "Every detail," I said. She sat down slowly. She looked at her hands for a while. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" I want to be fair to her here. She didn't try to deny it. She didn't perform grief or outrage. She sat with what she had done in a way that told me, somewhere underneath all of it, she still knew who she was. That was the hardest part. Looking at her knowing that the person I had loved was still in there, making the worst choices of her life. "I'm going to tell the truth," I said. "All of it." She asked me about the vehicle. I told her I had given an amended statement to the police. Her expression shifted, and for a moment I saw what she was doing. Calculating whether her business partner had acted alone, whether she could create distance between herself and the decision. "I need you to understand something," I said. "I don't know exactly who was behind the wheel. The police will figure that out. What I know is that I was lured there by a text sent from your phone, and that luring is the word the detective used when I spoke to him this morning." That landed. She was quiet for a long time. "He told me it was just to scare you," she finally said. "He said he was going to run close, spin the truck, make it look like an accident. He said you'd walk away with a bruise and we'd have time to." She stopped. "Time to close the deal before the divorce paperwork disrupted the partnership agreement," I said. She looked at the floor. "I didn't know he was going to hit you like that. I didn't know you'd be underneath the truck. I swear to you I didn't know that." "Then you should tell the police exactly that," I said. "Every detail. Because right now the rental agreement connects your business account to that vehicle. And if you let him construct a story without your input, you will end up absorbing a great deal more than your share of this." I watched her process that. She was always smart. She had always been the smartest person in most rooms she entered. I had admired that about her for 11 years. I watched her use that intelligence now to understand precisely what her situation was. "You're not trying to protect me," she said. "No," I said, "but I'm not trying to destroy you either. That's not the same as protecting you. You're going to face consequences for what you did. I want those consequences to be proportional." She left without another word. She called her own attorney within the hour. By the following morning, she had provided a complete statement to the detective, implicating her business partner as the driver and architect of what was now being formally investigated as attempted vehicular homicide. In exchange for her cooperation, the prosecutor agreed to consider reduced charges relating to her role in luring me to the site. Her business partner was arrested at the development office 2 days before the commercial closing. I was discharged from the hospital on a Thursday. My brother drove me to the house I'd grown up in, where my parents lived. My mother made soup. My father sat with me on the porch and didn't ask many questions, which was exactly what I needed. Over the following weeks, I began to understand the full shape of what had been built and what was now coming apart. The commercial development deal collapsed. Without the partnership agreement, which was now entangled in criminal proceedings, the buyers withdrew. The property reverted to a development holding with outstanding construction debt and no clear path to completion. Both my wife and her business partner were named in civil actions filed by the contractors who had been expecting payment from the closing. The business partner's wife executed her prenuptial agreement with the precision of someone who had been mentally preparing for exactly this scenario for some time. She retained 70% of all jointly held assets, which was a significant sum. Her husband's attorneys attempted to argue that the prenup was invalid on procedural grounds. The judge disagreed. He was charged with attempted vehicular homicide, criminal conspiracy, and several counts relating to the financial irregularities in the development accounts. His attorney worked hard. He was a competent attorney. He managed to negotiate the attempted homicide down to aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, on the grounds that the intent, as documented, had been to frighten rather than kill, and that the severity of my injuries, while serious, did not support the highest threshold for the homicide charge. He was sentenced to 9 years. My wife was charged as an accessory to assault and with criminal facilitation. Her cooperation with the prosecution, combined with a clean record and genuine evidence that she had not known the full extent of her business partner's plan, resulted in a suspended sentence, 2 years of probation, and a fine. A lot of people thought that was too light. I was not one of them. I had asked the prosecutor to consider her cooperation. I had meant it when I said I wanted proportional consequences. What she lost beyond the legal penalties, her business, her professional reputation, 11 years of a shared life, and her own sense of herself, was not nothing. My divorce was finalized 4 months after my discharge from the hospital. The terms were straightforward. Because she had contributed to the circumstances of my injury, and because the development firm had been partially capitalized by marital funds that were now unrecoverable, I was entitled to a settlement that left me financially stable. I didn't take more than I was owed. I've never needed to take more than I'm owed. There's a postscript, and I'll keep it short. About 8 months after sentencing, I ran into the business partner's wife at a coffee shop. We had exchanged a few emails during the legal process, mostly practical things about documentation and timelines. We had never really talked. We sat down together that morning for almost 2 hours, and it was the kind of conversation you can only have with someone who has been through the exact same specific catastrophe from the opposite side. We weren't victims together. We were survivors separately, comparing notes. She told me that her husband had sent her a letter from prison asking for forgiveness, framing his actions as the result of professional pressure and personal failing. She had not responded. She showed me the letter. I told her I thought not responding was the correct decision. She laughed, a short, real laugh, and agreed. She also told me that the development property, the one at the center of all of it, had eventually been purchased by a regional investor group who had no connection to anyone involved. They broke ground on a mixed-use commercial project the following spring. She said she had driven past the site once and felt nothing, which she described as a victory. I asked Carol, the property assessor who had found me in the dark and stayed with me until the ambulance came, out to dinner about 6 months after everything was resolved. I had tracked her down through the county assessor's office, which involved a surprising amount of paperwork. She seemed both flattered and mildly alarmed that I had gone to the trouble. I told her she had saved my life, and I thought that entitled me to at least attempting to buy her a meal. She agreed, on the condition that we go somewhere with good pie. We've been together for 1.5 years now. She is patient and practical and deeply unimpressed by drama, which suits me more than I can say. She also makes excellent coffee and has a dog that gets along with Cooper, which I consider a meaningful sign. I think about the 11 years a lot. I think about the fact that my wife and I built something genuinely good, and she chose to take a match to it, and I think about what it means that someone can know you completely and still make that choice. I don't have a clean answer for that. I'm not sure one exists. What I know is this: I did not throw the match. I did not accelerate toward anything. I lay in a gravel lot in the dark and I thought carefully about what I was going to do, and then I did it correctly, and now I am sitting on a porch with a good dog and a cup of decent coffee and a woman who thinks proportional consequences are a perfectly reasonable thing to believe in. That's enough. That is genuinely completely enough.